Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of Potstilled Live. This, I am very delighted to say, is the Dingle Distillery takeover of Potstilled Live. Gentlemen, how are we doing? Mr. Graham Coull, Mr. Beardy Dave Cummins. What is going on, gentlemen? Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Welcome.
Cheers, Matt.
Welcome, Dingle. Virtual Dingle.
Exactly, virtual Dingle. And Dave, where are we catching you from?
Dublin. Yeah.
We've got two virtual Dublins and a virtual Dingle. There's nothing wrong with that.
The 3Ds.
Exactly. So, lads, I know that we are literally coming off the back of an incredibly busy week for you guys. It is the launch of your Dingle Potstill Batch 4 and the inaugural Dingle Single Potstill Cask Strength release. So, first of all, I know that they are always manic days. Dave, we've talked about it in previous years, but I'm sure this year is no different. Graham, your first time dealing with the kind of craze that is a Dingle release. And Graham, I suppose first to you and Faye, how have you found it? I'm sure it's a tiring experience at this point, but fun.
Yeah, it's nice for it all to come together and see the whiskey actually out there being released and being enjoyed. There's always things that have to happen last minute, you know. There are a lot of obviously online promotion work we've done with the kits that you got tonight, and we did a big Top Drams session last night as well. So that was, you know, a good bit of work, but it was great to get all the packs out safely, and touch wood, we didn't have any breakages this time, which is a minor miracle, I think.
I think that must be an Irish distillery record to have not a single breakage in a promotional pack anywhere.
Yeah, Matt, can I just say I'm a wee bit worried about the red light behind you. Are you working tonight or something?
No, thankfully that's not. I can make it many colors if you'd want, but I figured since the cap of the Dingle bottle was a nice kind of maroon, I went a little on brand. If I'm going to be slagged for it, I'll just change it to a neat green or something.
We'll start calling you Roxanne.
That's lovely. I'm sure.
Listen, at least you can make a drinking game out of saying my name. But yeah, welcome, guys. There is actually a ton of comments coming in already. So at the start of every show, we do say hello to everyone that is watching in. We have Paul in the Belfast Whiskey Club saying a very big hello. There we have Cormac Sullivan saying a good evening to all of us as well. We have we can't see Faye. It's just kind of a phantom voice coming through as well.
you can definitely hear her though.
Exactly. Patrick Mulcahy saying good evening to each of us. Shamim De Bruyne saying huzzah. She's excited about the tasting. Eric Goulding saying he's looking forward to this. Sarah Kennedy up in Belfast saying a big hello. There's actually a ton of people coming through here. Not everyone I can get to right this second, but do let us know how you're enjoying it, all the drinks throughout the evening. And guys, this is exactly the time in which we have the two guys sitting in front of us from Dingle Distillery. Ask all the questions you ever want. And if they're stupid questions, I'm sure they'll still answer them. And if they're really stupid questions, I just won't put it to them as a question. So it's fine. Don't worry about it. Brian Holland, French, he's saying he's excited for this ages, and he's got the kit and batch 5 single malt sitting in front of you. I actually also have, my batch 5 single malt sitting up here behind me, so might have a little tash going with you a little bit later on. There are a ton of people saying hello all over. I'm looking through here. You've got the Republic, Northern Ireland, the UK. Doug Ledden jumping in asking, is Faye hiding? Yes, she is. Tim saying hello from New York. How is it going, Tim? We're going to be talking to you, I suppose, or more. I'm going to be talking to him on his show a little bit later on in the month. So I'm looking forward to saying hello to him. But this night is right. Doug Ledden, if anyone doesn't know, is the marketing manager for Dingle Distillery. I just saw his question come in saying, "Why is Dingle whiskey called Dingle?" So that kind of threw me a little bit. But I mean, Dave, do you want to take us from the beginning of why Dingle whiskey is called Dingle?
Primarily because it's in Dingle. It is of place. Yeah, I suppose if everyone doesn't know, like Dingle would have originated its sister company, Porterhouse Brewing Company. Oliver and Liam set up back in the late 80s, early 90s, and they asked Peter Mosley to come over and give him a hand, and 30 odd years later, Peter is still here. And in the noughties, Oliver came up with the idea of making or going into distilling, and Liam thought it was great. Let's put it in beside the brewery up in Dublin, and Oliver was like, no, let's put it down in Dingle. So Dingle Distillery was created, and from 2012 on, we've been making gin, vodka, and whiskey. So yeah, it is of place. That's the main thing about it. Like, it's, you know, small, artisanal, you know, an old mill just outside Dingle town.
I'm actually, as you mentioned the gin there, I am currently sipping on what I've made my own version of a pink gin out of the what is this now, the 2019 World's Best Gin.
Yeah.
So I'm feeling very panache this evening. So I suppose, Graham, for those out there who don't know you, I suppose tell us all about being the master distiller at Dingle, and why a man with such a lovely West Kerry droll is talking to us on the podcast this evening.
Can I just see you're getting stick about your shirt already?
Oh, the shirt, yeah, I do like a shirt. I can't compete with Dave in the facial hair department, and you definitely can't either, Matt. So I have to compete other ways.
Don't throw me under the bus.
I got you to start hanging up on me.
Dave, just picking up, you described Dingle as small and artisanal. That could perfectly describe Doug Gledden as well, couldn't it?
Yeah. He's hitting underneath my beard here.
Yeah, he hibernates for the winter. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so why is a Scotsman in Dingle? That's a good question. But yeah, I spent 25 years making whiskey in Scotland, and those that are keen on the eye, they'll be scrutinising what's behind my head here, and you'll maybe just see some Glenmurray, and you might see the odd Glenfiddich there as well. So that's where my whiskey roots started, and then I say just over a year ago, made the big move across to Dingle, and it's been a wonderful year since. Albeit there's been some issues, but yeah, the whiskey side of things has been great.
I presume the issue is the pandemic, not the whiskey.
Yeah, no, the whiskey's great. Whiskey's very resilient. That's the one good thing about it. That there'll always be whiskey, even once we get out the end of this, we'll still have plenty of whiskey to offer. So, yeah.
And perfect. And so you guys moved from, was it Elgin to West Kerry?
That's right. Elgin, Glenmurray was Speyside Distillery, so based up. Elgin's the biggest town there, and yeah, I moved there. So we're used to being on the coast. We're not used to seeing rain every 30 minutes. We usually get longer than that in Elgin between showers, but yeah, it's you know, a rural location to another rural location, so it's not been too much of a culture shock.
Well, that's good. I don't know how proficient you were at Scots Gaelic, but I know you're now in the Gaeltacht. Have you been picking up a couple of focal Oscailga, have you?
Yeah, one of those at least, yeah.
That's good. I know from speaking to Faye before, I did ask her what the culture shock was like moving from Elgin to Dingle and what it was like, and Faye mentioned that there's far more restaurants and pubs in Dingle than there were in Elgin. Is it a similar quality of life, or is it kind of almost home and now you're settling in?
It's definitely almost home. You know, I think, to be selfish, we've been lucky to have Dingle to ourselves this year predominantly, so it's been fine to settle in and actually see Dingle as it normally is. But you know, I do believe, well, we did see a bit of it in the summer when it was very hectic, but yeah, it's been a nice time. Unfortunately, all the pubs are closed just now, so like everywhere else, we're just waiting for that time where we can have a pint again.
Exactly. Some nice porterhouse beers, or perhaps a Dick Mac's brew. Something to wet the whistle, I suppose.
Definitely.
So we have a number of people coming in with their comments on Dingle. It was a great atmosphere in Dingle, and Michael Matthews saying the distillery is close enough to Dingle you can stagger home to your B&B. Now, he says B&B. If you go the opposite way at the roundabout, you can go to the campsite, which is where I usually stay, because the whole town is usually filled up with beds. So I think there's lots of options then in Dingle. Obviously, a very large tourist occasion in the country, and perhaps nowhere better to be making whiskey. You're surrounded by absolute green pastures. I'm sure the barley amongst everything else. I know you guys use a deep water well, so you're amongst the ingredients as it is there, and I'm sure. And from a I suppose a distillery scale, I know that you're formerly of William Grant, and you're looking after the Glenfiddich and Balvenie and Kininvie. And actually, I was also formerly of William Grant, so perhaps I was actually selling some of the distillate you would have watched over at some point. But between Glenmurray and Dingle, are there large differences, or is the kind of I suppose the distillation techniques, you've just simply swapped out 2 pots for 3 pots?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the scale of things at Dingle is much smaller than Glenmurray. I think Glenmurray would be 30 times the output, but when you drill down to the processes, they're very similar. You've got your mashing, you've got your washbacks, you've got distillation. Whether you've got 3 stills or 10 stills, it's the process is very similar. What it does allow me to do is get much closer to the spirit and to the maturing spirit, and keep a much closer eye on that, and be, but it's actually much more fun to dabble with whiskey and play with it. Whereas at a bigger distillery, you've got lots of other issues to deal with, which kind of can take you away from the fun element as well. So
absolutely. And would gin have been a part of the repertoire you would have been making before, or is that kind of a new fun element of the Dingle Distillery?
No, gin was new to me, and vodka as well. So that was something nice to have to learn. Also, triple distillation was new. I'd only done double distillation up to then, so it all takes a little bit of time to get your head around it, especially when I'm getting into the senior years, where retaining information can be a little difficult.
Sure, I'm sure there's lots of time for you to forget things yet. Don't worry about it. But I suppose coming from the experience in Scotland and now being landed in probably one of Ireland's most well-known and kind of fun distilleries out there. I mean, Dingle's got a great brand behind it. I suppose what are the Graham Coull marks you're putting on the distillery? I know I have an idea of 1 or 2 of the things you've brought with you from Scotland, but can you tell us a few of the things that you're, I suppose, doing that perhaps they weren't doing before, or small things that you're kind of adding or changing, or new casks or new grains or so on?
Yeah, I think I really am building on what was there, what is here already. It's there's some great maturing whiskey which is now heading towards 7-8 years old, in excellent casks as well. A lot of sherry casks filled, bourbon and port. So what I'm doing now is really putting a structure in place for the next 5-10 years, where we sort of widen our remit for our casks and put in cask policies, wood policies that will deliver the expressions that we need for the future.
Well, that makes sense. How did the conversation go when you brought up the idea of making peated whiskey in Dingle? Because as far as I remember speaking to some of the higher ups in Dingle a couple of years ago, and the answer I got from them was, "We will do anything except peated whiskey."
Yeah.
I've tasted it. It's fucking delicious.
The jury's out with some. I've still got to convince 1 or 2 that it's the right thing to do. But hopefully, I think the few people that have actually been able to taste the distillate, we've certainly had some great feedback from it. But no, I'm not here to change Dingle radically. If we can play around with a few things, then that's good. But Dingle has a firm foundation already in quality of spirit and triple distilled spirits. So anything I do that's different, I certainly will maintain the core aspect as well.
Yeah. Elliot Hughes of Dingle just dropped in saying he's not sure that Graham told you were distilling some of the peated malt. So that's fair enough. And Elliot, nice to have you on the show, or at least watching along. And for everyone who is watching along, do, as I mentioned earlier, take this as your point. You've got Ireland's finest sales manager and brand ambassador sitting with the long bushy hair and the big shaggy beard. And then, of course, you've got Master Distiller, Mr. Graham Coull, sitting here. So you do have questions as we go along, and we will be tasting some of the fantastic whiskies as we go along. Do use this opportunity to ask questions. I can't promise I'll get around to all of them, but at least we'll be able to answer some of them. So I suppose, guys, you know, you've had a lot of feedback over the last couple of days. Are you ready to get into another tasting? Are you ready to break down into what is the newest release, which is the single pot still batch 4?
I think we are. Yes, yeah, we had a good run at it last night, but I'm ready to go again. And you know, with the deconstruction pack, it's a lovely chance to be able to try the components and see the whiskey broken down, so to speak, and then see how it forms itself as we go through into the pot still release at 46.5%, and also a fine chance to try the cask strength as well.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions before we jump in. The first is a comment, I suppose, more than a question. I'm aware that you guys have literally crashed like every site so far since the release. I believe you crashed the distillery store, you crashed the porterhouse beer shop, and then last night on Talk Drams, I think it was so popular, Talk Drams got banned from Twitter for being too active. So if we can keep it a little bit on the chill tonight, that we don't get Potstilled live taken off the air, that'd be wonderful. But I suppose from a distillery point of view, you know, we've talked a little bit about coming from the Scottish point of view, and see, Dingle Distillery. I'm not sure if yes indeed is to my part that you've crashed everything, or to another person's comment, but yes indeed I feel is appropriate. But this is the single pot still batch 4 here. When you were blending this, Graham, what was it like, I suppose, experiencing and working with pot still coming from a malt background? I presume this is your first time working with pot still as a category.
It definitely is, yes. And you know, we made our pot still spirit this year back in February through to April. So we did about 3 months of pot still spirit. So we've got some experience there of the new make, but this release is the first time that I've worked with it as a mature release, and you know, trying to work with the different cask types that we've got and bring them together.
From process point of view, was it very different?
It's not too bad. The most obvious thing is that, you know, the spent grains that are left in the mash tun, they're very bulky. So it takes a bit more. If you know Dingle, the poor lads dig the mash out every time physically with a shovel. So it's big and fluffy. It's not the best thing. So they were quite glad to see the back of it after 3 months. But process-wise, yeah, there's not so much sugar there. So fermentation, you don't get quite the alcohol at the end of fermentation, and therefore your spirit doesn't reach the same strengths as you go through the 3 distillations. But in general terms, it's fairly straightforward to handle.
So essentially, the yields are just a bit lower with the pot still than the malt would be. Is that it?
Yeah, with the unmalted barley, you never quite get the same. Yes, you can use the enzymes, but again, the Dingle mash tun is a wooden mash tun, quite traditional. So we don't extract maximum sugar from the barley. This year we also threw in a little bit of rye and oats into a few mashes as well at the end. We did a couple of weeks of more experimental mash bills, so we'll see how they develop over the next few years.
Absolutely. I do have one question before we get into this. Keane Kennedy has asked, any recommendations for a new whiskey drinker on things to consider when evaluating the taste of the whiskies? I know he does have one of these packs that we will get into in a moment. I don't know if either of you want to take the question there.
I probably take it. It's just, for me, it's like just spend a good bit of time smelling the whiskey and let it open up, and then taste it. And whatever pops into your head, everyone's palate is completely different. So whatever you're tasting or smelling, that's totally down to you. You know, so it's that whole thing of you're never wrong. and then have a taste of it, and then leave it for a few minutes, and then try it again. If you want to add water, add water. But yeah, just take your time. There's Indy. He's gotten big. I saw her the other day. Dropped around the whiskey.
Yeah, you've just been dropping around every couple of weeks, so you get to see her growing. So she just came over trying to lick my shins a little bit there. So she never knows what to do when she's on camera, but she's calm now, so that's good. But I mean, I like your point there, Dave. I mean, whiskey's very subjective for everyone. Yeah. I know we have some very creative tasting notes coming up for the individual samples, and I'm looking forward to. I've actually decided to go blind into these. So I haven't cracked open any of the yeah, that's a microphone. Sorry, she's trying to lick the microphone sitting in front of me. And yes, Mary Ferder, lovely puppy. Well, Mary, if you tune in, we will have Indy a couple of times. When she gets bored, she comes over and says hello. She is a little border collie, and she is about 6 months old now, but she's from a big litter of 10. So this is about as big as she's going to get. She's going to max out at about 10 kilos. So this has absolutely nothing to do with whiskey. She just wanted my attention. So, but yeah, for those who are coming to whiskey for the first time, it's a lot of nosing. For me, I think holding on the palate for a couple of seconds, we're not in the market of doing shots, and you also lose a lot of the flavor and the experience when you kind of knock it down like that. Letting it sit on your palate, get some of that flavor over your palate is a great touch. I don't know
afterwards, and just letting it, let the taste, because you'll get more coming back as well, more flavors after you've swallowed the drink as well, or the whiskey. You'll get more flavors coming back through the back of your throat and that. So just let them, develop.
Graham, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think just keep it simple. Don't get too hung up on what you're drinking, and it's very easy to especially if you go into the Twitter whiskey world and see the chat going on there. It can be very easy to be intimidated, but probably the best thing is just don't listen to David Mara, and you're going to be fine.
I think one of the things that I learned over the years was compound flavors are a great aid. People taste like fruit salad, the old Chewit Sweets fruit salad, and I think that's the worst tasting out in the world. What does fruit salad mean? But if you break down the flavor of fruit salad, you're into pineapple, raspberry, and vanilla. So even as a tasting note, I remember being in Woodford Reserve doing a tour, and you get brought into the flavor lab, and it had like bubble gum written on the whiteboard. And someone then later went and Googled what the flavor was, like what flavorings went into bubble gum. And then we're able to break down what they were talking about. So don't even, if you don't have the vocabulary, don't worry about it. The same as sommeliers. Sommeliers don't, there's been numerous tests done with sommeliers, and sommeliers don't have a better flavor palette than the rest of us. They just have a better vocabulary and recall than most people do. So if you're new to the vocabulary of whiskey, don't worry about it. And Graham says, don't listen to people who are trying to, seem fancy if it intimidates you. Drink it and enjoy it. This, though, is what we will be tasting this evening. The lovely Dingle Distillery deconstruction kit. First of all, leibh dánta sa dangan quish Gunta Kerry era. That is very cool. Handmade in Dingle, County Kerry. For those of you who didn't have the pack, do keep an eye out on Potstilled Facebook page for giveaways. This is possibly the coolest sample pack I might have ever seen. I know the handmade leibh dánta isn't just a saying. I know you guys literally put these together yourselves with the coolest little sample bottles I've ever seen in the country. So I know, Faye, that you also had a large part of coordinating that. So I very much thank you for the effort that went into these, because these are spectacular sample boxes, and also 0 breakages. I think
absolute miracle. It's delighted, because nothing worse than sending these out and at the last minute, somebody doesn't get their pack or it's in bits. It's
but they were very much a labour of love. They were hand filled. We had to hand cap them and crimp them. And between myself, Sarah, and Kevin, it took a wee while, but it went okay.
Well, how was the actual building the boxes? I'm sure that was kind of almost the more difficult part of than just the filling themselves.
We had to have a video sent over.
We got a video, you know, that the males at Dingle did the usual thing, try and build it, failed miserably, got halfway and then threw it in a heap. So we got a video, and
the girls in Dingle sorted it.
That had the attention span to watch the video, then took over.
Okay, so what you're saying is if it wasn't
blood, sweat, and tears.
That's
So for those at home who have a beautiful Dingle deconstruction kit in front of them, walk us through what we're going to try. So that we have a deconstruction and then a couple of the reconstituted samples in there as well. Sorry, it's a little hard to get in camera shot with me as well. Yeah,
you've got to, well, basically for this, you only need to know the alphabet through to the letter D. So if you know A, B, C, D, we're fine. If you don't, then maybe you need to go somewhere else. But yeah, we've got the components, which are A and B, and then we've got C, which is the Potstilled standard release at 46.5% alcohol, and D is the cask strength at 59.9% alcohol.
Okay, so are the samples at bottling strength or at cask strength?
The bottles A and B are at bottling strength at 46.5%, so that you can compare with the complete release, which is bottle number C. So A, B, and C are all 46.5%.
Perfect. So it's probably about time for those at home who have the sample kit. That's why I had a gin and tonic ready for me, because I knew we were going to be sitting here for a little bit talking before we cracked in. But this is the good enough time as any to crack in. As I said earlier, I've left this totally blind to be able to try this with you guys from a first point. So do feel free to start your tasting experience here if you've got it. I don't know if Graham, you I know I see the small sample bottles behind you, but I don't know if you even need them at this point. But
it's always much easier to speak about whiskey with a whiskey in your hand.
Absolutely. So this is sample A, as I have here, sample A for anyone who's tasting along with us. And for anyone who's tasting along with us, let us know what you're smelling in the glass, tasting in the glass. We'll walk through it with you. And again, questions, keep them coming, because we've got the guys who know in front of us. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what's in sample bottle A then, Graham?
Okay, so there are two components. There are two constituent parts within the Potstilled fourth release. And sample A is from an ex-bourbon cask. So we combined ex-bourbon casks with Oloroso sherry casks. But the one we're trying first is the bourbon component. So it's a full maturation bourbon cask, first fill bourbon cask. We only ever use first fill casks at Dingle just now, and obviously that will be the case for the near future as well. So what you do get from that is a good quick maturation. So although we're maybe just drinking whiskey, which is relatively young at 6 years old, it has had the time to pick up the character from the wood. And bourbon casks, the first thing you'll see with looking at the two components is the bourbon cask is the color, which is a lovely sort of light golden straw gold color, which you will never get a dark color from a bourbon cask. And that's something to if you are new to whiskey, the color of the whiskey can tell you an awful lot about where it's come from.
How are you finding the casks on the bourbon side of things, single malt compared to Potstilled, Graham? Like, just because this is the first time you've Potstilled in Ireland, compared to Scotland.
Yeah, I think the bourbon. The Potstilled is a quicker maturer, a faster maturing spirit than the single malt. And and maybe not that it's speeding ahead, but it starts its life with more character as a new make spirit. So it's got that little bit of head start, which it maintains through the early years. I would say now, looking at the single malt in bourbon cask at Dingle, it's now starting to compete with the pot still. The whiskey, the whiskey at 7, 8 years old is a really, really interesting time. It's starting to move towards more the wood character, and it's starting to lose that youthful spirit kick. But the whiskies we're trying just tonight, they do have that lovely spirit edge with them, as well as some of the character from the cask.
So Cian, who was asking earlier on about the tasting the whiskies, saying he's getting a light apple smell from sample A, which I think is bang on the money here. For me, your apple is there, and then there's kind of a big, full, kind of almost custard cream, vanilla. Like there's a lovely kind of rounded sweetness to it as well on the nose. I haven't tasted it yet because I do want to see what people's thoughts are coming through.
And I would say the fruity element that's coming through, whether it be citrus fruit or your apples or pears or whatever you may be picking up, that's tending to come from the spirit side of things. That character is there at day one. It does develop. It becomes, your citrus flavors sort of diminish, and then you move into more darker fruits or summer fruits, kind of fruitiness and character. The custard creams and the vanilla, the ice cream, that's the bourbon cask that's starting to deliver that to the whiskey.
Yeah. Okay. So if everyone wants to have a little taste along with us, I know we've been kind of probably smelling it long enough. Exactly, Sláinte. My apologies. I was a little rude there. I was overzealous in my attempt. Wow, that palate is fantastic. So this is it's funny. It's sweet yet tart in the same sense, if that makes sense. I'm trying to pull the flavors from my palate a little bit. It has both a sweetness and a tartness at the same time, which I'm enjoying with a little bit of the grain in the background. That's very different, and it's funny as well because I tried a wee sample of sample C just to have a nose and a little taste a couple of days ago, and this is in its component entirely different and very interesting. And I'm looking at your tasting notes here: rhubarb crumble and caramelized brown sugar, and I can see the tart of the stewed rhubarb and crumble, I suppose, from you're getting from the different grain elements there. Very interesting tasting notes on this kit. Particularly the sweet chili sauce on the nose is a new one. But was that your input then, Graham? Or
yeah, I can't deny that they aren't my tasting notes. I was on good form that day, Just some days, and to be honest, some days tasting notes come much easier than others, and it's not the amount of whiskey that you consumed. It's just some days you draw a blank and you fall into the standard flavors that you always get, but other days that things just come to you. And I quite often sounds bad, but I'll sit with a whiskey at my desk at work and go back and forth to it.
Excuse me, Elliot's watching this.
throughout the day, because you pick up different things, and the other thing about whiskey as well is, definitely pour it into the glass a little bit of time ahead of when you want to drink it, because it does take time to acclimatize temperature wise, and also just settle down,
Yeah. That's and it's fun, Graham, working in a distillery. We can have a wee glass sitting in front of you at work as well. Sensory analysis, I think, is the official title of what you're up to there. If Elliot's still listening, Doug, I think it's Doug, the Dingle Distillery.
If Elliot listened,
yeah, exactly. The Dingle page has said to feel free to try the Bean and Goose Dingle whiskey chocolate in between samples. I would, but it was delivered to my work where it was promptly devoured by my workmates. So I had about this much of it, and unfortunately, I don't have any to eat along. But I think that is a good complaint for the bean and goose that came along with the whiskies. But yeah, so I'm very much enjoying this. Do you suggest that people keep a wee bit in the glass to try along with sample B to try them off each other, or do you think that it's more of a comparison just between sample B and?
I don't want to give anything away here, but when we reach the Potstilled 4, the actual release, you will detect both of the components in there. You can sense the character. So if you want, as a reference, to keep a little bit back, it might be a good thing. But once we get to sample C, hopefully you can sense both components there and see where the flavors are coming from. So
if those of you who are lucky enough to have multiple glasses on the go, and perhaps keep an eye on them. I am enjoying out of my Dingle branded Capitas. I have a couple here. I probably have to find a third for myself. Someone was asking what glass, Graham, you were drinking out of, and I don't know if it's your Glencairn that they're asking about, or if it was, because I think, Dave, you also have a Dingle Capita, or I'm not sure if it's a Capita, but it's definitely a nosing glass.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of
other ones on the side with the other ones in it already, and they're just like whiskey glass, old-fashioned ones.
Yeah, I don't. I've got my bourbon is in the Glencairn, and then I'm into the stemmed glass for the remainder. I like a stemmed glass. It's nice to hold. I find with a Glencairn sometimes because you're holding it in your hand, you can heat the whiskey up too much. The stem does help to, and it does make you look like a poser when you go like this and all that. So
you'll never be one of them.
You could be an influencer yet, Graham. Not to worry.
Influencer tight shirts, maybe.
Yeah, I'll influence it.
Exactly. Yourself and Michael Cowan will get along great, no doubt.
And he's an absolute treasure.
That's good. I mean, he is. He's definitely. If anyone's seen his face masks, actually, one of them is my go-to face mask. It says there's a beard under here, and it makes me feel more of a man. It's fine. We've actually have some great tasting notes coming in for sample A, but let's not deter from the continued tasting. Leaning across here to grab sample B, which has a darker color on this, and as you mentioned earlier, that the color might be able to tell you a little bit about the whiskey that's inside. So perhaps let's pour some of the sample B in. I also just want to reference one of the comments here. Matt McKnight saying they stole my chocolate, the monsters. Matt is one of my friends from a lovely city a couple of you may have heard of called Philadelphia. I am wearing my Philadelphia John t-shirt, which is basically the Philadelphian word for yoke. It's just a catch-all word. I wore it in the spirit of Pennsylvania going blue tonight. So Matt, saying a big up to you there now. But yeah, so tell us about sample B that we should all now be moving on to in our glasses.
Okay, so sample B is the other component. It's an Oloroso sherry component. So quite different from the bourbon cask. A different way of extracting the flavor. A sherry cask is like a sherry sponge, really. Yeah, you're extracting the old sherry from the wood, whereas a bourbon cask is pretty much new wood, really, with a chard inside. Yes, there's been bourbon in it, but all the bourbon is doing is taking a little bit of the flavor away, a character away. Whereas with the sherry cask, your spirit is interacting with the wood and extracting, as you can see from the color, the lovely sherry influence from the cask.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And from memory, I think kind of around the first couple of years of Dingle's inception, there was a kind of a partnership with one of the bodegas. Was it Bodega Montelena, or there was kind of a sherry partnership at the very beginning. Would this have been kind of those stocks or of a later partnership?
This would be, yes, yeah. We it's one thing I'm working on as well. We're trying to continue to build relationships with cask suppliers that that have a similar outlook to ourselves. So in the more recent years we've been working with Fernando and Castilla, and we've taken some lovely casks from them, which you will see some coming through. Took some Muscatel from them towards the end of last year. So I've got them working away in Potstilled and in single malt. So yeah, it's just widening our net a little, but obviously trying to build relationships at the same time.
Absolutely. So talk to us now that we have sample B on the nose. What are you, I suppose, looking for in this sample? And for everyone at home, please do let us know your thoughts on the nose before we move on to the palate here.
Yeah, sherry, you're traditionally looking for dried fruits, really. That's the kind of character that I'm looking for. It can also come through as a little bit of dark chocolate, maybe slightly bitter as well on the nose, but generally looking for a nice balance. These are what I call traditional repaired sherry butts. So they are very old casks that we're extracting the flavour from, as opposed to what you can also buy are seasoned sherry casks, which have gone through a quicker process to get the sherry flavour. So these casks have they're probably 50, 60, 70 years old before they even arrive at Dingle.
Elliot's just your little work trip to Healy, where you worked extremely hard, lifting your hand with a sherry glass and using your belly to eat. We
did well. I just followed the leader.
I've undertaken a similar expedition. It's a very tough crawl through the bancos of Jerez, and I can assure you the food is tiny quantities, and the sherry is much plentiful. So I'm sure it was well enjoyed. It was actually where I learned. I don't speak a lick of Spanish, so I did a bit of a Google Translate, and I learned the difference between a vasa and a copa. So we did a tobacco crawl. It's about 14 bars on the tobacco crawl in Jerez. I don't know if Graham, you being a very professional whiskey distiller, probably didn't see any of the tobaccos, but we got through about 6 or 7 of them, and I went to one place and I asked for two Vasa, the whatever Pedro Jimenez, and the guy looks at me and is like, he was like, what, like Vasa? I'm like, yeah, like this has worked every other place. I'm like 3 or 4 sherries in. I'm like, my Spanish is excellent. This is fine. I was like, yes. So the dude comes over with 2 pint glasses of Pedro Jimenez sherry. He puts them down in front of me and he goes, and I was like, and you could see the startled surprise in my face. And he holds up a small sherry glass like this, and he points at my pint glass and he goes, "Vasa, copa." Yeah. And then he walked away. So anyway, that was probably the cheapest pint I've had in my life. But I'm sure it was quite a journey through Jerez on your sherry exhibition. Or expedition, should I say. So in terms of flavor, guys, sláinte, and let's have a little taste. And for everyone who's at home who hasn't dove right into this, because this is a delicious sample, please do so now. Sláinte.
Cheers. I'm just eating all the chocolate.
Glass, yeah, much darker. It really is Christmas in a glass. It's got that all those lovely, say, dried fruit, raisins character. They all are also being, a slightly drier sherry. Certainly nowhere near as sweet as Pedro Jimenez. So it has that heavier elements, almost a there's caramel character there, almost even a little bit nutty. So it does work very well with the Potstilled, because Potstilled tends to have that spicy character. So you're offsetting that with a lovely sort of sweet Christmas cake flavors.
So do you think that inherently that Potstilled works a touch better than malt in the sherry, or is it just a different element it brings in?
I think it's a different element. Single malt's probably a bit more elegant. Potstilled is a little bit more in your face and a little bit more, rough and ready almost as a
yeah, said like a true Scottish just oh no, I'm out of here now. But yeah, as Matt Kelly says here, the drying effects of the Oloroso works well with taming down some of the sweetness. I presume it means from the kind of the grain of the Potstilled itself. And like you said, there's a lot more of those kind of aggressive in your face flavors from perhaps some of the unfermentable sugars of the Potstilled, I think, as well. But these also, just in general, these sherry casks have an amazing a quality to them, and funny, I often would use some flavor descriptors for very good sherry casks that in any other industry would sound negative, if that makes sense, because you've got almost a very genuine kind of, there's a musty grape to it, a little bit of a chocolate leather oiliness, things that in any other, if you said a beer was somehow leathery or oily or musty, that would be a terrible descriptor. But this is absolutely fantastic. Sampling this,
there's kind of a damp leather character to it, and in the comment before, the dryness as well. That's a characteristic of the fortified wines that you do get at the end. When you've sipped the whiskey and swallowed it, it has this kind of cloying, drying effect in your mouth, whereas the bourbon tends to throw spice at you for longer and as a finish. So the two are quite different.
I have a good question here from Cian Kennedy again on his whiskey journey. How do you know what grass tastes like? And much to the same question, how do you know what leather tastes like? Or in the same idea. I don't know if either of you guys want to take that.
I wouldn't want to admit having tasted leather anywhere. That could get you into serious trouble. Now, Dave, you maybe can comment on grass, because you're closer to that than any of us.
I don't know. I know one of the lads that he used to always say, just go out and smell, like especially different fruits and stuff like that. Smell them, taste them, even like grass. Just grab it and smell it, and it just sits in your head and it'll pop up. It'll be just that image when you smell and when you taste, just pops in your head. Yeah, there's Conor Ryan.
We've a good question here now from JP saying, how long in the sherry cask? So component B or sample B, this is wholly matured in sherry, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. Again, full maturation since day one in the sherry casks, and again they're around 6 years old. So both components are very similar in age.
And that is very much the kind of MO of Dingle, that is full maturations in different cask styles that are then vatted together for marrying and bottling, rather than a finishing in that sense.
That has been the case, and with the earlier releases, it certainly worked very well combining different cask types, and still does. We're probably moving into the next phase of Dingle. You'll start to see more single cask type releases, because the casks themselves will have the character to stand up on their own, and also I've done a lot of wood finishing in my time, and it is something that I'm working with at Dingle as well. So yeah, hopefully some interesting things to come in the next couple of years.
I can't find the comment right now, but there was a question a few minutes ago as to what the most interesting to you cask type is in the warehouses at the moment that you can talk about.
Yeah.
Remember, Elliot's listening.
I think that probably the most interesting one, because it's one I've never worked with, is there's some champagne casks in the warehouse, and they were filled with new spirit back in 2018. And even in when I first started, just a year, probably just a year and a half old, they'd taken on some lovely character, and wine cask again matured quickly. There's absolutely no problem drinking wine matured whiskey at 6, 7, 8 years old on its own. It will stand up well. So yeah, they're very, very interesting to look at and work with.
I'm going to try to call Elliot from the ethers of Twitter back in. Where in the world did you guys find champagne casks? Almost nobody matures champagne in casks anymore. That is something that's hilarious. I've been looking for years, and I've spoken to so many champagne producers, and they're like, we literally just don't do that anymore. We just don't put champagne into wood. That is absolutely wonderful to hear that there's those kind of casks in the warehouses. Because I know that the Glenfiddich, I suppose a former element of yours, came out with the Grand Cru casks, which were of champagne ilk, but not champagne casks. And that was also one of the things they talked about, was basically no one in Champagne ages wine in the champagne wine in the casks, basically. So that's wonderfully cool. And I presume that gives a whole new element. Because I've had some white wine Chardonnay casks, which I thought would do nothing and has been wildly expressive. I presume there's some very interesting flavors in those casks.
But very similar, at Glenmurray I worked with wine casks a lot. And Chardonnay was a big thing, full maturation Chardonnay with a 10-year-old. It was excellent, and it's still spoken about now. It was a cask that really worked. It also worked with Chenin Blanc. Possibly it didn't work quite so well as the Chardonnay, and obviously worked with red wine casks as well.
Perfect. Now I see Elliot Hughes saying it's definitely a champagne from Champagne in France. I'm not questioning where your casks are coming from. I was just saying it was super cool. Time is running along. So for everyone at home, it is time. We have done component A, full bourbon maturation pot still. We have done component B, full maturation of pot still in sherry. Now it is to C. This is the new release, what you get in the bottle, which is sitting behind me. One person has asked on the mash bill, as far as I remember, these are a 50-50 malt and unmalted barley mash bill.
Yes, they were. Yeah, 50-50. We kind of moved more this year. We were more 55-45. But
you wild man.
I know.
And for sample C, do you have kind of a ratio you can talk about between the bourbon and the sherry? What went into the vatting?
Yeah, definitely can. So sample C is made up of 73% of sample A and 27% of sample B.
Okay.
And that should add up to 100.
I mean, I'll trust the mathematics at this point.
Basically, a quarter sherry and 3/4 ex-bourbon.
And when you were in the warehouses, what drove you to kind of that number?
So you're steered up obviously with the stock you have and what proportion it's in. So that dictates whether you go full Oloroso or full bourbon or somewhere in between. But then it's a case of really just playing around with it and tweaking it to see where the sweet spot is. And sometimes you'll think it's adding more sherry will work and that's the best idea, but quite often it's not the case. You need a certain amount of bourbon cask in there to give it the body and the spice character, and then you're adding Oloroso as a almost a finishing flavor to the bourbon cask.
Absolutely, and I think one thing that is there's a flurry of cask finishing in Irish whiskey at the moment. I think one of the things that are lost is that backbone of very solid bourbon maturation. A lot of comments coming through in here, guys. Let us know your thoughts on the nose and sample C. Let us know your thoughts on the palate. We'll move through those quickly. I do see one question coming through here about, am I getting questions from Ivor asked me, am I getting your questions? Ivor, I am getting your questions. I just didn't understand your last question. So if you could perhaps rephrase it and ask it again, then I'll be able to ask it because I wasn't sure how to pitch it. But I am getting them. I am seeing all the comments coming through on Facebook and on Periscope through to our little comment feed here. But gentlemen, I suppose a good moment to jump into the nose here. I only have so many Dingle Capitas, so I am onto a lovely Tua glass. And almost immediately between the two, the sample A and the sample B, we're into an entirely different nose here, which is absolutely fantastic. And I see Stephen Kavanagh saying that nose is closer to A than B. And I have to agree.
Yeah, some of the spice and the bourbon kind of kicks back in at the start of this one. But I think when you taste it, you'll get the good combination. Because I think Potstilled spice kind of is the sherry kind of dominates it a bit more compared to the bourbon. But it's definitely evident there. And
actually, after Graham's point from earlier, sorry, Graham, I've just gone back to my sample A that I've had left out since we tasted earlier. There's kind of a very delicious milk chocolate nose developed into it a little bit, which perhaps is just more into the creaminess and the vanilla than much else. But as Graham said earlier, leaving it out does let it develop a lot more. But Graham, I'd love to know your thoughts on the nose and the palate of this, and perhaps I'll say sláinte now and kind of follow you through. Just I know time is moving on.
Yeah, so I think one thing I've found with the releases, recent Dingle releases, is that most of them have a bourbon component within them, and that bourbon component tends to shine on the nose, and then the sherry element kicks in when you actually taste. So for this one, you probably have to do both to really grasp it. You're also tasting this after having tasted 100% Oloroso, so there is almost a bit of palate cleansing has to go on. So you do need to nose and taste, and then taste again, and then probably on the third taste, you can tune into the actual taste of the whiskey. So that is just the excuse to have 3 sips of whiskey.
I was going to say, someone mentioned earlier there's very generous sample sizes, so enjoy your 3 tastes, lads. And I'll say sláinte now, guys. We'll have a little taste of it here. So do let us know in the comments what you're smelling and what you're tasting as we go along. So enjoy.
Our surrogate son in Limerick is watching with his real parents. So we're missing you, Evan.
I like that we've never had a surrogate shout out before, so I'm that's fantastic, and it's amazing as well the difference between the 2 original samples we were trying. Yeah, that's actually amazing how different that is on the palate. Spice, dark fruits, but then again, I think pulling back towards that bourbon vanilla creaminess, almost like a vanilla bean rather than just kind of a vanilla essence of that.
I get the initial sweetness from the bourbon when you taste it, and then the sherry kicks in with the characteristic flavors, and then towards the end, the finish, the bourbon comes back again with that spice, and that's where the sherry cask doesn't have the finish of the bourbon. So I think that if any reason, that explains why they're better combined than being separate.
I like that. And actually, we did an interesting question that is said from John Gagan here, saying, what percentage of, I suppose, if you're combining a bourbon and a sherry cask, how much would you need to tip one of the other to get a difference? And I think that's very much a piece of string, how long is a piece of string kind of question. But do you think one would overpower the other if you went for a 1-for-1? Obviously, they're not the same size casks, but if you're going for the same volume for volume, one would overpower the other, or it would be a layering situation?
I think at this, if you're combining 2 casks of the same age, then at this age, the sherry cask is more dominant. I'm not saying it's the better whiskey, but it's more dominant in character. So if you went for a 50-50 mix, you'd lose the bourbon. To give an example on this one, I probably, when I went to tweak the final recipe or the final composition, I probably played around within a kind of 5% band. So that yeah, and you will notice differences even with that. So the difference between 27% sherry and 22% sherry was enough to make a choice.
Okay, to kind of tip it over that way.
Yeah, but no, to go too far. I think if we go too high and go above 30% sherry at this particular moment, then you won't just won't get the right balance.
That's fair enough. And Ivor has very politely re-asked this question that I wasn't understanding earlier on. He said, you've inherited a profile of whiskey, and he's curious to ask, you see it develop in your planned future model of Dingle whiskey?
Yeah, so I've inherited a cask composition or a cask mix in the warehouse of roughly 40% bourbon, 40% sherry, of which half are PX and half are also, and then about 10% port and 10% others. So I'm good. I'm maintaining that at the moment. Within the sherries, I'm widening the spectrum a little bit. This year, we're bringing in some Palo Cortado. Beginning of next year, I'll have some Amontillado as well. So adding a bit of variety in there. Continue with the port, because I do love port matured whiskies. I think they're excellent and they appeal across the board to everyone almost. And then I'm also the 10% others. That's where I'm dabbling in things like rum casks and rye casks and other interesting things. So just really widening the spectrum of casks that we've got, but having a consistent backbone there that we can work on, because at Dingle we will move towards having core expressions where we have consistent releases year on year, and for that you need to have a consistent base of casks to work from. You can't it's much easier to have all the components in the cupboard than having to try and make do with ones you don't have. So yeah, you need a bit of a plan for the future.
Well, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. People imagine distilleries in a very romantic sense. You can go in one day and just start making whatever you want, but there's a very large grand scheme plan. And particularly when you're ordering barrels from across the world, you're consolidating to containers and trying to get them in around some of those hairpin bends between Killarney and Tralee and then Dingle. I'm sure it takes a lot of coordination to get them down there, and you'd want to know what's going into them and where they're going in 5-10 years down the line. Dave had a bit of a laugh. I had a good reaction. He said Palo Cortado. Palo Cortado is my favorite type of sherry. I did discover it on my little tobacco crawls in Jerez. Shamim de Bruyne is actually watching along with a little tasting kit tonight. She can back me up, because I literally sent her a text about an hour before the show asking her if she can source me a bottle of Palo Cortado. So she will be able to attest to that. We've a load of questions coming in at this point, but I am very aware of the time. One thing before we move on to the final sample D and the inaugural Potstilled cask strength release. There's a number of exciting things going on at the distillery at the moment that I know you guys would love to talk about, and I want to fit them all in. Dave, I suppose to you, around the clock.
Yeah.
Give us an old rundown. Why did you break the Porterhouse Brewing Company's shop in collaboration with Dingle Distillery?
We released a good whack of our Around the Clock. So Around the Clock is a new brew that we've made, and it's very interesting because it's a beer that's brewed for 24 hours and it has 7 different hops added through the brewing process of the 24 hours. This is we're releasing a little bit of it early, and then we're going to be releasing it, so it'll be a 365 24/7 in a year's time. But at the minute we've released it early, and it was aged in Dingo bourbon and sherry barrels. So
when you're saying you're brewing for 24 hours, essentially, so would some of those be bittering hops and some a little bit later in?
Yeah, Yeah.
It's still bittering hop, more aromatic towards the tail end, maybe a whirlpool hop or something in there.
Exactly, yeah. So it's one of the things, one of the lads, or Peter and the lads, saw it in being done in another brewery over in America, and they thought it was something really cool, especially with the malt base that we use. So yeah, we've collaborated with Dingle on it to create with the sherry casks and the bourbon casks. And like, I was there today in the brewery with Dan and Martin taking the beer out of the bourbon and sherry casks, and just the difference in the two. Like, it went into them at about 9.5%. I think it came out about 12 on the bottle. So the bourbon was just like toffee caramel, like it was just like creamy butter, like the smell, oh, it was unbelievable. And then the sherry was just like dark fruits, you know, raisins, kind of chocolate. It was, yeah, brilliant. Absolutely love it. So yeah, it sold out. Our little small allocation that we just released, but there will be more coming next week, and stout house pack. But yeah, it kind of sold out really fast that it just crashed the site.
Fair enough. You do have a charity auction coming up as well?
Yeah, we do. We are teaming up with, I'll grab the bottle here. We're teaming up with Irish Whiskey Auctions, and for their November auction, we are going to be auctioning off, where is the number there? Bottle, I don't know if you can see, bottle number 1 of our very first cask strength of the 4th Potstilled release. So that will be going up for the Laura Lynn Children's Foundation in the November auction of Irish Whiskey Auctions. So all proceeds from the auction, including charges for, or the commission from Irish Whiskey Auctions for Anthony Kate, they're all going. So they literally get like 110% of the whatever price it goes for, which will be brilliant, you know? Yeah.
Wow, I think that's great. And it's something that I know that the Irish Whiskey Auctions love doing, and they do donate their auction fees into the charity pot if anyone does donate a bottle for charity purposes. And some people do it like you exactly there, put up an incredibly rare bottle number 1 of a cask strength release, of the inaugural cask strength release. And sometimes some people want to raise money and they donate a rare bottle from their collection simply to be auctioned. Irish Whiskey Auctions are more than happy. I think, don't want to speak on their behalf, but from the historical sense, from looking at what they've been doing, they've been very happy to work with charities. And one of the things also very interesting is they actually contact the charities beforehand to ensure that they're actually happy to be named, because not every charity wants to be named with alcohol, because alcohol's fun, and you know, charities don't always want to be fun. And that's fine, and that makes a lot of sense. And Graham will know from working with some of the bigger distilleries, and I've been there as well, there's lots of rules around what you can and can't be associated with alcohol when you're internationally, so that makes a lot of sense. So this is the big moment we've all been waiting for. Sample D, I was going to say number D, but sample D. I wish I could reach behind me and pull out the bottle. I can't, because it's possibly the most sought after bottle in the country right now. 500, aka the same amount of number of founding fathers that were in Dingle. 500 bottles were released of the cask strength of the Potstilled batch 4. One of you guys talk me through why you decided to release the inaugural cask strength version of this bottling.
I think, you know, it's come about because the Potstilled release now, number 4, has reached. Well, previous releases have always been very, very small, and to actually, you know, release a cask strength would have taken away the volume from the standard release. But this release now, we're up to almost 8,500 bottles. So, you know, to release 500 cask strength made sense, you know, and there, you know, it's also a nod. It's a nod to founding fathers, but it's also a nod to the people out there that are shouting for cask strength whiskey. You know, especially, it seems even more in Ireland than anywhere else. We have the cask strength crusade. You know,
I was just about to say, someone might say there's a crusade going on.
Yeah. So you know, so as we've seen, there's demand for it. It's huge for cask strength, and it's great. It's a lovely chance to enjoy your whiskey straight from the cask, and you can then do what you want with it. You can add as much or as little water as you like.
And I was actually watching along on Talkdram last night, and I saw a lot of comments that were saying that the cask strength edition and the 46.5 edition are almost different beasts in themselves, and if you'd had both, you'd be delighted to try them side by side, so you wouldn't be disappointed by getting both. And I suppose obviously a difficult thing to kind of coordinate, but I'm sure as a blender and distiller, that must be a great thing to experience as well. One's not just I suppose just a higher ABV version of the other, when they're distinctly different like this.
Completely different, and when you add water to whiskey, it changes. It changes completely. It can change in a very good way, and sometimes if you add too much water, it can kill a whiskey and drown it. So the two whiskies are very, very different, and they allow you to enjoy the whiskey in a different way. And sometimes you'll reach for cask strength, and then other times that the taste is not for you. It depends on your mood and what you're looking for. So
can I just answer Matt Kelly? 59.9, and I hand wrote all those numerals on those 500 labels.
And Faye, I think Matt Kelly thanks you for both your answer and and your what must be a very sore wrist at this point, writing all those labels. So I'm going. Sorry, Faye, go ahead.
It was a labor of love. I was instructed to by my immediate boss.
Well, look, Faye, at least at this point, if anything goes wrong, I don't think he can fire you anyway.
Well, watch this space, you never know. My other boss is watching as well.
Now that would be a first. That would get people talking about Dingle.
Well, that would be a first. And now I'm going to throw in some controversial logs to the fire. Faye has said 59.9, and Dingle Distillery has come through on Facebook comments saying 59.5. So I don't know who I'm to.
I think Doug's been drinking. It's definitely 59.9.
Thank you, Dave.
I'm going to get out the Anton Power, lads, and I'm going to start testing the alcohol on all of these.
Don't do that.
Dave, my protector.
Exactly. Just before we dive into these, and everyone who is tasting at home, please do have a nose, have a taste. Let us know what you're thinking as we go along. It's all part of this. Stephen Cavan has asked that it must have been quite difficult to get a ratio between the bourbon and Oloroso casks that work both at the 46.5 and at cask strength. Did that thought process of having to release both affect your blending ratios?
Well, to be honest, when I start with this, I'm generally always working at cask strength, because that's, you're taking samples from cask. So that's what works. And then you obviously then add the water and take it down to 46.5 and do a sense check on it that it's okay. But yeah, you do need to look at the two strengths and just make sure that but basically the problem with, or the issue with adding water is that you can lose the whiskey, but you're reducing the whiskey to 46.5%. That risk is not so much. If we were cutting right back to 40, then there's a danger that there is definitely a danger that a whiskey could work at cask strength and not at 40%. But when you're only coming down to 46.5, it's the risk isn't quite so bad, I don't think.
Well, that's fair enough. I presume, as per usual, the bottles are hand bottled, labeled, and packaged in the distillery itself.
They are, yes, yeah. We did them. It took us a couple of weeks to get through it, but we were well organised. We had everything, all the materials in and ready to go. It was quite a stress-free bottling, and with everything ready to go out. So it's nice to get to see it come to completion.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. I'm also loving that Matt Kelly. And Matt Kelly is great because he's an avid Irish whiskey fan who tunes in every week. For any of you who don't know, and perhaps I shouldn't say in case his boss is listening, but Matt Kelly is a lawyer in Charleston, South Carolina, and he got a deconstruction tasting pack and is tasting along with us at what must be 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Charleston. That started at probably 3 o'clock, and he's a trooper. He's usually here on his lunch break. I know he takes a late lunch break, usually every Thursday, to tune in. So, Matt, fair play to you, and on the cask strength as well with us. So that's fantastic. Yeah. For everyone at home, take a sip. Graham, please talk us through the nose, take us through the palate. I'm going to say sláinte now, so we can have a little taste along.
Can I just say, Dingle Distillery are coming back and saying, I've got photographic evidence that they did indeed write 59.9, Matt.
Hey, listen, I hope you understand that I wasn't questioning you. I was questioning Doug behind the keyboard.
Yes, but Douglas H. got it right as well.
There's a first time for everything with Doug getting it right.
For everyone else who doesn't know, Doug's the new hire, so it's first in, last in, first out, or was it at this point?
Yeah. Anyway, back to the whiskey. Yeah, so cask strength. I mean, the first thing I would say is probably if you're not used to cask strength, then tread gently, even with your nose, because you can get some serious burn off it with the high strength. So better to hover your nose above the glass than to poke it straight in. Then with any cask strength, I would say take the smallest sip you can. That then tells your brain just how spicy or how hot that whiskey is, and it gives you an indication of really how much water you're then going to add. I certainly wouldn't recommend sipping away without adding water. You do need to add a little bit to open it up, but everybody has a different palate, and it all depends as well. We've had 3 whiskies already, so our palates are pretty well tuned in, and we'll dive into the cask strength. If we tried it first, it would have been quite a shock to the system.
Absolutely, and I think having tasted those other expressions earlier, and if you still have some in your glasses, you can kind of dip back in. I still can't get over the Oloroso. This Oloroso actually is like walking through some of the bodegas in Spain. There's that fantastic raw mustiness, but in a very beautiful, sensual, aromatic way. And I think it just ties in very well on the cask strength. The palate has that sweetness and creaminess, but is almost silently layered very well by the sherry. They're not too disjoint. They're not two flavors that one comes after the other. They blend very well, and even almost more seamlessly than the 46.5. I think it's a very, very interesting and delicious example of Potstilled whiskey, and there's a lot of comments coming through here. John James Burns saying that it's incredibly smooth for cask strength Potstilled. Eric Goulding saying it brings a warm feeling to your chest. Absolutely. A few more of these and you bring a warm feeling to the rest of your body too, I'm sure. Stephen Cameron giving his tasting notes. Oak, vanilla, light spice, sticky toffee, honey, slight charring, but very buttery overall, delicious. And I don't think anyone will disagree with him on that. Eugene Corrigan, a cask strength all day for him, loving the finish on it. Then what a finish on the cask strength. A few people asking for the Oloroso to be released as a single cask on its own, and I think you've alluded to the fact that we might be seeing some single casks coming out in the future. And it's and then actually Eamon Dowd coming in and saying that just overall the presentation of this deconstruction kit has been fantastic. But Graham, I suppose from your tenure now, landing from Elgin in Scotland into Dingle. I'm sure there's lots of differences and lots of funny stories. And just before we get into that, I see Doug Levin pressing me to ask you a question. So I'll do as Master says in this point, and he wants to know what makes this particular example of a 59.9% whiskey so as when we say smooth or perhaps have such a lack of an astringent alcohol burn compared to other whiskies. Because that was a question he got a lot last night on Talk Drams. So I'll press that to you if there even is an answer.
It's a difficult one to answer, but I think you've got to look at what makes up this whiskey, and what's in this whiskey is spirit. So, Dingle spirit is slowly distilled, long fermentations give you the fruity character. You've got a lovely balanced spirit, and then we're maturing in excellent casks. First fill casks. The sherry casks are the best you can get. Your traditional sherries. And the ex-bourbons are, tip-top quality as well. So if you combine, good spirit, good casks, and give it time, then that's the best way you can best start you can give to the whiskey. And hopefully, people are enjoying it tonight. You're seeing the fruits of the team's labour at Dingle, and all the components are working and coming together.
Exactly. Now listen, Graham, no matter what they say about people in production, you'll make a marketeer yet with an answer like that. Fantastic stuff.
I think that's what Doug told me to say.
it was written down on a card in front of you, his face holding it up for you. But yeah, so
chocolate.
A reward for doing well, I'm sure. But I suppose we're running out of time here. But I do want to ask, I suppose, since joining the Dingle Distillery and your time in Kerry, what fun anecdotal stories can you tell us about working in the distillery? Times of hard learnings or funny things gone wrong, people ending up in feckin' West France with a shipment of barrels instead of West Ireland, or what give us a little anecdote to some of the fun things that happen. And obviously at the time, I'm sure there's a lot of head-wrecking things that happen, but when you look back, you can have a bit of a laugh about it.
Oh, gee, that's a harder question than the one before.
Done last Thursday night, working till 8 o'clock, getting those packs made up. It was stressful, but we had a laugh. We had Cormac and Oisin from production in helping us. Everybody had hands on throughout the day, and we really took it to the limit. We didn't know if we'd get it out there, but Team Dingle did it.
Well, hang on, before Graham, you answer that, I'll give you a second to think about it. Faye, give me an insight. Are there any Irish names you're struggling with? Because you're in the heart of an Gaeltacht Tarnchin. So
yes, swear too much.
that was good. That's not the question I asked, but it was the answer I wanted.
The lads at the distillery have now started apologising to me when they swear, because I get them around.
But I'm delighted with that answer, to be honest. Well, that's fair enough. I'm sure you've put manners on them at this point. And Cost wants to know what about the calendar? I don't know what the backstory to this is, but now I do want to know. So is there that?
Would like all the lads, as in male lads, to do a naked Dingle calendar. This came about this week. You may well laugh. Dave, you'd have to be included.
Who came up with this idea?
Caught.
Oh my God.
I'll be back to you in 1 second, guys. Continue telling that story.
Oh.
Good, but,
I somehow don't think the calendar will happen, even though they do tell me the dad, what's it called? Dad belly. It's not a dad belly.
Dad's army, more like, yeah. Yeah.
But
no, I think we'll not progress that idea at all.
Sorry, lads.
Then, Koch, sorry, you heard it here.
We have a string of bells by the front door for the dog to pull on when she wants to go outside. She's living in an apartment, so it's a thing for her to pull on when she needs to go to the bathroom, and we're not there to see her. And we're all just sitting in the living room, and the dog's here as well. And the bells just rang in the hall by the front door on their own. So we thought someone was breaking in there to make a very interesting live stream, but they just fell off their command hook on the wall. Jesus, the heart was set sideways in me. Thought someone was breaking in.
That was last week.
But yeah, sorry. Anyway, a nude calendar from Dingle. Ellie Hughes, can we please move on? Yes, Ellie, we can. Graham, funny story before we go to round up the evening.
Well, I suppose, I've introduced one or two things to Dingle in the year that I've been here, but probably the most controversial thing was introducing the whole team to haggis. We had a Burns supper back in January, and I did the address to the haggis, and I think they see me as quite a laid back, quiet kind of Scotsman, but obviously when you start addressing the haggis, you get a little bit wild and carried away. So I think I scared the absolute shit out of them doing that. But they all loved the haggis, to be fair. Wolfed it down.
I'm not too dissimilar to pudding at this point, so
yeah, exactly.
Scots and Irish, not too dissimilar.
No, lots of common ground, I think.
Exactly. When you lads get your independence, we'll adopt you. It's fine. Well, I very much appreciate it, guys. In the comments, let us know now what your favorite sample has been so far between A to D. So we can have a little roundup. Everyone's going to have something different, but it's always interesting to see what people think. Beardy Dave, Mr. Dave Cummins, if people are looking to find Dingle whiskey on the social medias, where should they be looking?
All their usual haunts, as in to buy the whiskey.
Well, I was going to ask that secondly. Social media, just find you guys as a profile, find more information.
Oh yeah, just on any of our, on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, just Dingle Distillery or Dingle Whiskey on Twitter. You'll see everything there. Doug is pretty active on our social media, so you can't really miss him.
Yeah. Elliot Hughes dropping in saying he loves the cask strength. I would hope so. It's your whiskey, Elliot. Jesus. But Mary Ferrider saying that she's loving sample A. I don't know. I'm loving all of them, but the Oloroso cask is kind of taking my imagination away on its own there. And there's a lot of people coming through with different expectations, or not expectations, but different opinions on the casks come in. But Dave, I'm assuming at this point the cask strength is long sold out. But if people are trying to find the single pot still batch 4 release from Dingle, it's, I believe, an RRP of €95, 8,000 bottles released, 4,000 for Ireland. Where are they going to find it? Where can they find the retail? What's going on?
Pretty much your usual haunts. So like the likes of Irish Malts, Celtic Whiskey, James Fox's, any of your local independent off licenses, they all should have it. And again, if you missed out on the cask strength, be sure to jump on the Irish Whiskey Auctions charity bid this coming November and throw your bid in.
If people want to taste batch 4, Graham, I believe you'll be on 3 Dram, the upcoming 3 Drams tasting as well, which will be held on the 12th of November, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, yeah, that's a good chance to try the 4th release there, yeah.
And if anyone doesn't know, I am also hosting the 3 Drams tastings, where we'll also have Teeling and Bushmills in as well. But I'm going to ask all the same questions all over again. but at this time, perhaps it'll be more pointed because I'll know some of the answers. It'll be great. So, guys, thank you for everyone who's tuned in. Thank you so much for listening in. If you've missed any of this, be sure to watch the episode back on Potstilled Facebook. It's just facebook.com/Potstilled. It's also on the Potstilled YouTube channel. And also all of these episodes are put onto a podcast now. Actually, from today, we have gone live with the Potstilled Live, the podcast edition. So you can listen back to all of the Irish whiskey news in your earbuds on the go. And if you ever need to contact us, just look us up on Instagram or Twitter at Potstilled_, and you'll find us there. I'm seeing Doug Ledden is doing a very large shout out to the Fine Wines store in Limerick, which I appreciate. That neither Doug nor myself live in Limerick, but I appreciate that Doug is shouting out that one particular retailer. But I'm loving that everyone has been here, and I know there's a lot of new people who have been watching in. So to everyone who's watching in, be you old, new, or Barra de Blue followers of Potstilled or Dingle Whiskey, very much a very big thank you. And to Faye, Graham, Dave, and to the Dingle team in the background, I know there's a lot of you watching in. Thank you so much. Very much appreciate it. As I said, feel free to watch back on the YouTube or podcast channels later on. Rev Mila lads.
One too many, man.
I just said, listen, I was slagging the Scots for the couple of fuckle earlier on, and I fucked up the own language. But sure, look, let it be said of the podcast later. Good luck, lads. Thanks.
Cheers.
See you later.